So, just to get started, remember we started the book of Hosea prompted by the most important commandment in Mark chapter 12, where Jesus says, the most important one is this: Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. The second is this: love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these.
Amen.
Amen.
And we went into the book of Hosea because I wanted y'all to see the story of the unfailing love of God. And I hope that story prompted us into a deeper love and relationship. But today I want to take a pause on that and kind of redirect our focus on the second part of that commandment. And it said the second is this: love your neighbor as yourself. Right? And not only love your neighbor, but love your
enemies.
There you go.
Amen. Love your enemies.
All right. So that's what I want to focus on today. Or we're going on a little, wrote at the top a Hosea sidebar. Anyway, so just to review, redemption definition was clearing a debt in exchange for payment. Well, what I want to talk about today is forgiveness. About forgiveness.
Yes.
To forgive means to cancel a debt, to give up resentment or claim for requital, to pardon an offense. Does that sound pretty similar to you?
Yes.
So forgiveness and redemption are really similar. The only difference is where redemption was in exchange for a payment. Forgiveness is just canceling it altogether. So, let me ask y'all a question. How many here has ever been hurt or offended?
Oh, yeah.
You didn't raise your hand, you're telling a story. Okay. All right. Did you ever feel like they should pay the price for offending you?
Yep.
You might have even thought of the scriptures in Galatians 6:7. Oh, you're going to reap what you sow, buddy. Right? Those might have come to mind. How about Romans 12:19? Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. Right?
Yes,
So we might have thought, yeah, you're going to get it, you know. All right. So, now let me ask you this. How many in here has ever caused hurt or offense?
Yep.
Once again, we should all be raising our hand. All right. Some people they're like, okay. So we have been forgiven, so God is calling us to forgive.
Yes.
Actually, He mandates it. In Ephesians 4:31 and 32, it says, get rid of all bitterness, rage and anger, brawling and slander, along with every form of malice. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you. Colossians 3:13, bear with each other and forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone. Forgive as the Lord forgave you.
That's it.
All right, so everybody knows we're supposed to forgive. And it's easy to say that, right?
Yes.
Sometimes harder to do.
Yes.
Well, let's look at some reasons why God may have mandated that. This is a quote, not a Bible quote, but someone said, forgiveness set the prisoner free only to realize the prisoner was me.
That's right.
Amen.
Yeah.
Forgiveness is about you or us.
Yep.
God knew exactly what He was doing when He mandated it.
Oh, yeah.
Another quote that I liked says, your heart is much too beautiful a place for bitterness, unforgiveness, and resentment to take root.
Amen.
Amen.
This is not going to be a one-day teaching. Forgiveness is a kind of a big deal.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway.
So everybody bring your seatbelt next Sunday.
Yeah. Yeah. It is. We're going to try to do it in two parts. But anyway, today I'm probably going to spend quite a bit of time. I want to read y'all a story, so we kind of are going back to the young kids Sunday school type deal. But I want to read you the story of Joseph.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That
Yeah,
means
that's
she
a good
agreed.
one.
That was an amen, wasn't it?
Amen.
All right, so I want to read the story of Joseph. I'm going to skip around quite a bit. I would love for you to, during this week, to go home and read it, because I am going to skip quite a bit. And you will find that story in Genesis, starting in chapter 37, going through chapter 50.
Amen.
Before I tell you the story of Joseph, I don't know how familiar y'all are, but we're fixing to get there. Just a reminder, we hear about as a child in Sunday school about the coat of many colors. But I want to fast forward to the end of Joseph, because this is my main scripture. This is the main point. And I want you to keep this scripture in mind the entire time I'm reading. But Genesis chapter 50 verse 20 says, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good,
Ooh, yeah.
to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." So you intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. All right, y'all pray for me that I can read this little bitty writing. This is my little Bible I took to Israel. It was portable, but it's real handy and mobile, but it does have tiny writing.
I've got one of those in the car. It's like,
Okay, chapter 37. Jacob, also called Israel, right?
right?
Where the
Yes.
12 tribes come from. Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. This is the account of Jacob's family line. The very next scripture is going to talk about Joseph, and it says, "Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers." So it starts off right off the bat, not talking about the oldest of the family line. It's talking about Joseph right off the bat. And I'm going to skip down and it says, "And he brought their father a bad report about them." So right off the bat, we've got a 17-year-old boy coming to tattletale on the brothers.
Right.
Right? Kind of a brat.
Mm-hmm.
Just saying. Right?
Yep.
Y'all with me picturing this? So now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he had been born to him in his old age. And he made an ornate robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. Well, Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood up, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." Now,
Oh,
does
boy.
that sound like we're making friends?
Yeah.
You know?
I'm sure they probably whooped him then, right?
Well, his brothers said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said.
Oh, I bet.
Well, he even had another dream, basically the same as the first, just different context, showing that he was going to be called into leadership, right?
Right.
So he's going to be called into leadership. That's his calling. That's what the dreams are showing him. But he's a 17-year-old spoiled brat at this point. Obviously don't have people skills or how to get along with anybody,
Right.
which is kind of a requirement for leadership, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
All right. So his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Well, Joseph arrived at Shechem, and a man found him wandering around in the fields and asked him, "What are you looking for?" He replied, "I'm looking for my brothers." So Joseph went after his brothers and found them near Dothan. But they saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. "Here comes that dreamer," they said to each other. "Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams." When Reuben heard this, he tried to rescue him from their hands. "Let's not take his life," he said. "Don't shed any blood. Throw him in the cistern here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him." I'm jumping around. That's why y'all go back and read the whole thing.
Amen.
And it says, as they sat down to eat their meal, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. "Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites." So when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for, this is cool, 20 shekels. Is that ringing bells? Yeah, okay. 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. Just a little sidebar, in case you was wondering how the Israelites, so many came to be in the land of Egypt and had to be rescued. This is it. This is how they got to Egypt. This story.
Being sold to them.
Yep. So then they got Joseph's robe, slaughtered a goat, and dipped the robe in the blood. They took the robe back to their father and said, "We found this. Examine it to see whether it's your son's robe." He recognized it and said, "It is my son's robe. Some ferocious animal has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces." And if you skip down to verse 36, it says, "Meanwhile,"
Back at the ranch.
huh?
Back at the ranch.
Yeah, well, hold on. "Meanwhile, the Midianites sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard." So while things are looking bad, right?
Right.
They look bad for Joseph. His brothers turned against him, sold him, was going to kill him, then ended up selling him, and now he's in Egypt. But meanwhile, God's got a plan, doesn't he?
Yes.
Remember back on the scripture 50 and 20, it says to accomplish what is going to be done, the saving of many lives. So it looks bad. Joseph don't know the whole picture, right?
Right.
But just wait to see what God does with all this. We're going to skip chapter 38. So, Joseph's been sold to Potiphar's wife. So it says, now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. So, already we're going from a 17-year-old spoiled brat, basically, to now he's in charge of a household. Do you see how his leadership is being developed?
Yeah.
Right? We're accomplishing God's plan, right? So he's in charge of this household. Now Joseph was well built and handsome, and after a while, his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, "Come to bed with me." But he refused. When she saw that he had left his cloak in her hand and had run out of the house, she called her household servants. "Look," she said to them, "this Hebrew has been brought to us to make sport of us. He came in here to sleep with me, but I screamed. When he heard me scream for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house." When his master heard the story, his wife told him, he said, "This is how your slave treated me." She said, "This is how your slave treated me." And he burned with anger. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. So now he's in charge of this household, but now he's in prison. Kind of looks bad, right? Like we went backwards. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. Okay, so it looked bad, but we went from being the leader of a household to now we're a leader over the king's prison.
Right.
A bigger
You
outfit.
became a trustee
Right.
in the prison, yeah.
Okay, so now the story of the cupbearer and the baker, which are in prison. The Pharaoh was angry with his two officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, in the same prison where Joseph was confined. After they had been in custody for some time, each of the two men, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were being held in prison, had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. So the chief cupbearer told Joseph his dream. He said to him, "In my dream I saw a vine in front of me, and on the vine were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, it blossomed, and its clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, squeezed them into the Pharaoh's cup, and put the cup in his hand." "This is what it means," Joseph said to him. "The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position. And you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand just as you used to do when you were his cupbearer. But when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison." Well, the chief cupbearer did get released, just as Joseph said the dream meant. And the chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. 2 years had passed. So,
Good morning.
2 years passed. Well, the Pharaoh had a dream. And the chief cupbearer said to the Pharaoh, "Today I am reminded of my shortcomings." And he remembers, hey, Joseph, he can interpret dreams back in the prison. And he said, "Now a young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. We told him our dreams, and he interpreted them for us, giving each man the interpretation of his dream." So Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was quickly brought from the dungeon. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, "The dreams of Pharaoh are one and the same. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do." So Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt." Okay, so 17-year-old spoiled brat, leadership of a household, leader of a prison, to now second only to the Pharaoh and the whole land of Egypt.
Amen.
So, y'all see that?
Yes.
What was intended to harm him is starting to accomplish God's plan and his calling of that leadership. Okay, so at this point, Joseph's 30 years old. And he entered the service of the Pharaoh, king of Egypt. So we went from 17 years old to now 30. Well, when famine had spread over the whole country, just as we saw in the dreams, Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians. The famine was severe throughout Egypt, and all the world came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph. When Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why do you just keep looking at each other?" he continued. "I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us so that we may live and not die." So this is, you can keep reading the story because we're running out of time. But this is, they go down there, and all of that. That's how they all end up in Egypt. It says, so they all end up in Egypt, and actually the Pharaoh ends up moving them there and making them over things, the family. And then Jacob dies. Jacob dies, and it says, when Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, what if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrongs we did to him? But Joseph said to them, don't be afraid. I am in the place of God. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives.
Amen.
I really hate having to stop here, but this is where we're going to have to stop. But I think y'all can see where we're going with this.
Yep.
Going to cover quite a bit of stuff about forgiveness, but what if Joseph would have got bitter and mad and didn't continue in the way of God and His plan? What would have happened? It would have stopped him dead, cold in his tracks on his, what he was supposed to be called to be, right?
Right.
In his calling, he would have been done.
Oh, yeah.
Where would we be?
Exactly right.
Yeah, he would have been stopped cold in his calling
Oh, yeah.
if he would have held that grudge and, not forgave. Anyway, like I said, I hate, and I'm not going to take even questions or comments, but please go back this week and read Genesis 37 through 50. Think about chapter 50, verse 20, and how it applies to that, and then we'll go deeper into forgiveness next week, and then we'll talk about questions that y'all have. All right.
Awesome.
Amen.
Lauren.
Very good. Very good.
Yeah.